Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing today? So, today I have a special guest on. He is a member of my online ministry, Cross Media. I will get this preliminary stuff out of the way real quick, and then you can go ahead and introduce yourself. So, real quick, as I mentioned before, guys, I am on Rumble because TikTok and other social media platforms has been pretty annoying to me sometimes, and I don't have to deal as much about like censorship at all or cancel culture yet or what have you, right? Or my sound being removed from my video randomly or what have you. It's also possible I might be able to make money on Rumble, so. If you guys don't know what it is a alternative to YouTube. It's very similar to YouTube with its advantages and disadvantages. So I would encourage you guys to explore the platform and follow me on the Is He a Nerdy Christian Rumble channel there. With that said, I actually want to make you guys aware of some upcoming projects that I am going to have going on. So one of my nerdy projects that I have that I'm going to be working on is reacting to this. So I'm a huge Dragon Ball fan. If you guys have seen my content, you'll know that. And so this is a fan made series called Dragon Ball Deliverance that's on YouTube. And absolutely love this series. So I want to do a reaction to the 4 episodes that are out currently. So I'll definitely be doing that. Next up is a gaming reaction. So I like this game too. This is a horror game called SCP Containment Breach. Really cool. I did the first reaction, and that's posted online for people to see. You can check that out on my YouTube channel. But I'm going to be doing the second reaction soon, and hopefully posting that by the end of this month. Another quick thing. So this is a free video chatting website called Monkey. And what I do is go on there and talk to people about Jesus, the church, the gospel, Christianity, things like that. So I would actually encourage you guys to evangelize on there. I think it's a really good opportunity. But I'm going to be uploading clips of that content on my other platforms. But like a full-length video of me talking to people is going to be published on Rumble. So I would encourage you guys to follow me on Rumble if you want to see those conversations in full. My next, another full-length YouTube video that I'm going to be doing is going to be on the topic of slavery. We really, as the title suggests, we really need to talk about the topic of slavery in the Old and New Testament. It is a really big issue, and me personally, I honestly think that a lot of apologetics surrounding this issue have failed. So I'm going to be working on this and bringing a video that will hopefully bring advancement to this issue in the area of apologetics. And the final thing that I'll mention for now is that I will be doing a video titled "What is Faith?" Constantly, people will define faith as belief without evidence, or that faith is inherently fundamentally irrational. Because if you have to have faith, that means you didn't have evidence or you didn't have this or that. And so we're going to be diving into philosophy, like what is evidence, what counts as evidence, what justifies belief, and we're going to be talking about faith in the Bible. So how faith is used, probably in the Old and New Testament, but I will have a particular focus on the New Testament with passages like Hebrews 11 and many other things in order to argue that this definition that some Christians have just accepted and said, yeah, faith can be irrational, but have it anyway. But that atheists too have used in order to kind of argue that Christianity is a irrational belief and things of that nature. So, with all of that preliminary stuff out of the way, thank you to Jesse Walsh. Yeah, I hit 200 subs recently. It was kind of funny. One of my shorts, YouTube shorts, kind of blew up on me. So that's kind of where, honestly, that's where a lot of my subs are. It's honestly YouTube shorts for me. I don't think I've had someone. It's been very rare that I've had someone sub from like a regular YouTube post. But yeah, thank you so much for that. And I hope to continue to grow and be a blessing to people. So, with all of that said, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and kind of your background.
I'm Christian Serrano. I am a Messianic Jew. My podcast is called Notsuri Amuna, which means the Hebrew word Notsuri just means it's a Hebrew word for Christian, and Imuna means faith, so the Christian faith. And I give hermeneutics for the Messianics and hermeneutics the for Messianics and Christians, and I also fight against anti-missionaries like Jews for Judaism.
Yeah, very, very good. Have you? You must have heard about Tobias Singer at this point.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
he's a
yeah,
scary cat.
yeah. Bro, listen. I know that there was some stuff with him and Dr. Michael Brown that was kind of fun. There's been some stuff with him and I don't know if you heard of Anthony Rogers.
Yes,
Yeah,
love
there's
Anthony Rogers, man, great guy.
yeah,
He
for sure.
follows me on Facebook.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're
Oh,
friends on Facebook.
that's really dope. That's really dope. Uh, but yeah, so I guess tell us about your faith journey. Like, did you grow up in Judaism? Were you a serious practitioner? When did you come to the Christian faith, or how would you define those sorts of things?
So this is really interesting. So my parents were like Dr. Michael Brown people. Like they were Messianics, but they were more on the Christian side of things. They didn't really express Judaism like that, but they acknowledged where their roots came from, which was Sephardic Judaism. So my journey was I was a hardcore atheist for
Mm,
most of my life. For most of my life, I was a hardcore atheist. I like around my middle school years, I started smoking pot, started hanging out with the wrong crowd of people,
nice.
uh, did horrible things, man. Like, I used to be really into the streets. Like, I would set people up to get robbed. I used to do a
Cool.
lot of bad things until I was 18. So when I was 18, I went to jail. And
Mm,
I went to jail because I was car hopping. I was going in people's cars and stealing stuff. So when I went to jail, I looked at this book, and this book was about a samurai. And the samurai, and Joe Rogan talks about the samurai who where he pretty much gives the whole foundation of the samurai religion, and then he talks about his life, like he gives a documentary of his life. And he talks about once you see it, you see it in all things. Not only that, he also says that out of his whole life of being a warrior, the most toughest battle was obeying his conviction.
mm,
So, that kind of got me into martial arts. So I did Muay Thai for a while. I did Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I did judo. I did Krav Maga, and I also did Shaolin Kung Fu. I fell in love with Shaolin Kung Fu,
mm,
and I fell in love the religious practice of it, the fasting, how you get up early in the morning to go for a run, to stretch. I loved the tradition of it. So it got me thinking, what religion could I follow that gives me this type of motivation and discipline? Oh, I'm
mm,
feeling better. Okay. What gives me a better motivation and discipline? And it was Judaism. I fell in love with Judaism, which is my family's background. So I started to study Kabbalah, I studied Talmud, I studied Rashi, I studied Rambam, I studied Judaism as a whole. And what led me to Messianic Judaism is that I hit a brick wall. I had questions about Mashiach. Who is Mashiach? And I asked my parents, I said, who's Mashiach? And they're like, it's Jesus, it's Yeshua. So I had a hard time wrapping that around my head. Like, what? How
mm,
how can he be the Messiah? How can he be the Messiah? And then my mom was like, "Hey, I wanna give you this Bible," and the Bible is called the Complete Jewish Study Bible, and it goes through all the rabbinical texts, how Yeshua fulfilled all the feast, how Yeshua is the Pesach lamb, how he is so many things within the rabbinical stuff. I said in my head, I'm like, "I need to give my life to Yeshua HaMashiach, the, Melech of Israel, the King of Israel." So that's my journey.
That is a really interesting story. That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Just two clarifications, I guess. One, uh, the complete Jewish study Bible you said, was
Mhm.
that a that was it did it have the New Testament in it or just the
Yes, it does. It has the New Testament in it. It's written by a Messianic Jewish scholar called David H. Stern.
Oh, okay, interesting, interesting. I've not
Mhm.
heard of this. Okay.
Yeah.
I definitely have to see if I can't get a hold of that. Another quick thing. So you said the what you didn't like was Jews for Judaism, right? That
Yeah, Jews.
missionary group, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
okay,
yeah, I tackle Jews for Judaism, not, Jews for Jesus.
gotcha. Okay. Have you seen the one for Israel?
Mhm. My synagogue is a part of that.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I was gonna say your testimony kind of sounds like Dr. Michael Brown, and kind of sounds like some of the people that that share their testimony on the One for Israel YouTube channel.
Yeah, my rabbi one of my rabbis actually, is on the testimony.
Really?
Mhm. His name is
That is
Stephen,
really cool.
Rabbi Steve.
That is really, really cool. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a plethora of topics here that we wanted to talk about and cover. Uh, I guess you can pick what topic that we focus on first here.
I wanna talk about 2 topics. I wanna talk about Jewish mysticism, and I also wanna talk about, through the, you were asking me earlier about, Psalms 110.
Yeah, yep. So it might be so obviously this audience is mostly Christian, uh so it might be worth it to talk about Psalm 110 and then dive into mystical
Yeah.
Judaism. Okay, we can do that. So let me pull up for anyone who doesn't know, Psalm 110 is this pretty cool psalm. Uh yeah, definitely. We will. Ooh. Oh, I didn't know that it would actually put us above the comment. That's cool. Uh but yeah, it's this really cool passage of scripture. It's only 7 verses, so I'll go ahead and read it so that we can have our memories refreshed, and then you can talk about it. So it says, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your troops will be willing." Willing on your day of battle, arrayed in holy splendor. Your young men will come to you like dew from the morning's womb. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead and crushing the rulers of the whole earth. He will drink from the brook along the way, so he will lift his head high. And so
Mhm.
he will lift his head high.
Yeah.
So, this passage, particularly, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. And the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. This
Mhm.
is quoted in Hebrews chapters 5 through 7, where it's establishing the idea that Jesus is our high priest in the order
Mhm.
of Melchizedek. And we see this first in chapter 5. And then
Yep.
Jesus himself, he quotes this passage in a debate with the Jews when they ask him, "What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?" The son of David, they replied. Jesus asked them that question. And then Jesus says to them, "How is it then, speaking by the Spirit, uh, calls him Lord? For he says, sit, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If then David calls him Lord, how can he be his son?" No one could say a word in reply. And from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. This
Yeah.
is from Matthew chapter 22. And so, with all of that being said, Uh,
Mhm.
can we how can we argue? Because of course, a Jewish person is not going to accept the New Testament, right?
Yeah.
So how could we argue that Psalm 110 is messianic and is fulfilled in Jesus?
Well, great thing. I've done a podcast on this. It's
Mm.
on my it's on my podcast. It's called Zimak David, and it's pretty much about the messianic prophecies of rabbinical messianic prophecies of who Mashiach ben David would be, Messiah, son of David. So, Psalms 110, the first part you just mentioned, make my enemies my footstool, that is talking about, based by the rabbinical understanding, that is talking about Messiah being on the throne in heaven, and God is making the nations his footstool. And that's a midrash. That's a midrashic uh, commentary.
So
Um,
quick thing, what is a midrash?
so a midrash is, so you have this thing called pardes. Pardes is a systematic, aka how I would explain it, hermeneutics. So it's ancient Judaism hermeneutics. So you have a didrash or a midrash. It's a sermon, a teaching on a particular subject, either on a Torah portion or on a haftarah, which is the prophets in the writings portion. So when they're quoting the writings portion, there's a midrash that's explaining this is about Mashiach ben David,
Mm.
and they go into the subject stating that, hey, um, the role of Messiah is the role of the priest. Uh, King David wore a priestly garment. Moshe, Moses did sacrifices, and he was not part of the order of Acharon. He wasn't part of the order of Aaron.
Yeah, he wasn't a Levitical priest,
He
yeah.
wasn't a Levitical priest. So the idea of an anointed one being a priest is completely Jewish.
Mm.
So So Yeshua, being the priest, the high priest of Melchizedek, is the fulfillment of this prophecy.
Mm. Yeah, so if you guys don't know, Melchizedek is a character that is mentioned in Genesis chapter 14. I would encourage you guys to read Hebrews 5 through 7. It explains and interprets what's going on. But Melchizedek shows up as a king and priest. He gives bread and wine to Abraham, and Abraham actually tithes to him. And
Yeah.
this is the only mention of Melchizedek in the Bible. I've actually seen because because of the like if you read the chapter, even when I first read the chapter, I kind of read this and I was like, that his introduction kind of feels abrasive in a way as the reader. At least to me, it did. So there were other scholars who noted this as well and kind of argued that this was actually a later insertion into the text, and that's kind of why it feels abrasive the way it does. Just
Mhm.
real quick, have you heard such a thing?
Uh, on what exactly? What do you mean by what? Are you referring to Genesis? Or are you referring the interaction with Jesus and the Pharisees?
Genesis. So do you think that I don't think his portion there is a later addition, but it does at times when you read it, it does feel like disjointed in a way.
Yeah, so I would say that it's so interesting because the name Melchizedek, Meleki, uh, means it means king, and Zedek means righteousness. So king of righteousness, and then it says Melech Salem, which means the king of peace,
Hmm.
king of righteousness, king of peace. And when we tithe as Jewish people, when we tithe, we call it zedakah, which is the root word for zedek, which is righteousness. So the fact that Abraham did zedakah to Melchizedek would be absolutely historically accurate, in
Mm.
my opinion.
Gotcha. Okay, that's understandable. So, yeah, so he does that, right? So Abraham tithes to Melchizedek.
Mhm.
Melchizedek gives him bread and wine. That is significant, of course, because Jesus gives bread and wine to his disciples, and I
Mhm.
think that's a very interesting parallel to make there. But the only other time Melchizedek is mentioned is Psalm 110.
Yeah.
And for me, that's weird, right? Because you would imagine that a king and priest who is assumedly righteous and peaceful, and probably amazing, right, would be mentioned again, especially when God establishes the Levitical priesthood, right?
Mhm.
So I guess I'd ask you, do you have any thoughts on why there isn't any mentioning of Melchizedek after that, even when the Levitical when another priesthood is being established on earth?
Yeah, so, Melchizedek is kind of a mystical thing happening in a way because, um and that's why I make the argument because people say, "Oh, Melchizedek is Shem," right? I've heard this argument.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
I've seen that. I've seen that in the Talmud too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, he can't be Shem, and the reason why he can't be Shem is because, like you said, there's no other mentioning after that. There's no other mentioning of Melchizedek. And even when we read the New Testament, right? Even when we read the Brit Hadashah, which means New Testament in Hebrew, um, when we read that, I believe it's like the same passage. We read in Hebrews that he had no genealogy,
He had no.
nor did he had an ending or a beginning of days. So we can assume that this is a pre-incarnate Yeshua, just like the angel of the Lord, pre-incarnate Yeshua.
Okay, so that would be your argument.
That would be my argument because, for one, why would King David say, "Oh, I'm under the order of Melchizedek," right? Why would he say that?
So, yeah, right, so the notion then for some Jews, if I'm understanding why you're bringing this up, is that Psalm 110 is talking about David. But that doesn't make any sense
It doesn't
because
make any sense.
why is God promising David that he would be a Melchizedekian priest? Right.
Exactly my point. Why would King David say all of this? Well, if you look further into another psalm, it says that the tabernacle of David has been fallen, and there will be one who comes out of the tabernacle of David, and he will raise it up again. So that means David himself and all his descendants, except for this one descendant, will be the Redeemer of Israel, which means their arguments, Jews make the argument, I believe Isaiah 7:14 is talking about Hezekiah. Well, how can Hezekiah be it? He didn't raise the tabernacle of David. He didn't do anything.
Mm,
He was an awful king too. How can he be this king that you guys are mentioning? It's absolutely ridiculous. So that's where I go back. Like they'll say they'll say this Mashiach, a king Mashiach isn't supposed to be king and priest. Well, based by Psalms 110 and based by the Midrash and the Targums, it's clear that this future king will be a priest and a king, just like King David was. King David wore priestly robes, and he also did sacrifices for himself. And not only that, he was the king of Israel. Same thing with
gotcha.
Moses.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay. So you're gonna argue from these passages that must that the Jewish commentary,
yeah,
uh,
commentary.
debates, discussions, on the Old Testament, on the Hebrew Bible, that uh, the Messiah would be a king and priest.
Yes, absolutely.
That's very interesting. I know I wrote my last, I believe it was my last paper for my Old Testament class was a study on Melchizedek. So I came across the passages in the Talmud, I believe, that mentioned Melchizedek being Shem, but
Mhm.
I found most interesting was, I don't know if you ever heard of this, but there is a Dead Sea Scroll manuscript that we found called The Coming of Melchizedek, where in it Melchizedek is envisioned as this um, eschatological or end times figure who seems to redeem the true believers, the sons of light, and go battle against the dark forces of Belial. And
Yeah.
that was really interesting to me because that that's obviously not entirely like if you read it, it's not entirely what's going on with Jesus. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
it's not at necessarily, but the concept though that Melchizedek is this kind of king and priest who will come at the end to redeem us and save us and all these things and defeat the enemy, I think
Mhm.
is definitely a Jewish idea that you see.
Yeah, it's a Jewish idea. It's like the biggest argument I deal with these anti-missionaries is they'll read, Psalms, I believe it's Psalms 22, and
Mhm.
they will say, "The word pierce isn't there." Yes, it is. It is there. So, what the rabbis and Rashi used to do, Rashi, by the way, is a sage in the medieval times, and Rashi comments on this passage of Psalms, uh, 22. He says the lion represents uh represents Messiah's hands and feet being pierced. And not only that is mentioned, but when we look into um other manuscripts of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it doesn't say, uh, Karari, it says Kararu, and
Yeah,
Kararu means to dig into something.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
the
and
word
we should probably, just so that the audience is, tracking here, so I will go to Psalm 22. Can you okay, you can see the screen?
Yeah, can you make it a little bigger? Because 'Cause I'm kinda
Yeah, there should be not that, this?
yeah,
Makes
that's better.
okay, cool, cool, cool. Yeah, so this is Psalm 22. Jesus quotes this passage on the cross when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So I believe this passage is quoted elsewhere in the New Testament. But what we are referring to is, uh, where is it? It is yeah, it is verse 16 where it says, "Dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet." There might be a footnote here mentioning it. Yeah, it says Dead Sea Scrolls in some manuscripts of the Masoretic text, Septuagint, Syriac, most manus- most most manuscripts of the Masoretic text says, "Dogs surround me like a lion at my hands and my feet," or like a lion, my hands and my feet. Yeah, so I've actually heard Tobias Singer bring this up.
Yeah,
Uh, go ahead.
if you
Go
don't
ahead.
mind me, I'll share something with you guys.
Yep,
Um,
you should be able to screen share, so go ahead.
yeah, I gotta set it up really quick. Wait 1 second.
I got you. But yeah, I remember I looked into Tobias Singer's claims, and I also did watched Mike Winger's video on YouTube about Psalm 22, dealing with some of those objections, and Dr. Michael Brown's videos on the topic, and found them really interesting.
Yeah. Um, yeah, this is it.
Okay.
Um, lexicon. Okay, so I'm gonna screen share this right here. Share. So if
Uh,
you go right here, right? So it
it,
says,
it's not
can you
changing up.
see it?
Okay, there we go. I had to pull it up. Here it is. Yep. Go ahead.
So you have Kelavim, oh, Kelam, Kelaim. Then you have uh, Zevani. Then you have Adat, and then you have Mer- Merorim, and then you have Hikifuni. But see this word right here, right? It says bor dig hu, right?
Hmm.
Click it, and it says kur, which is the short of kuru, which means to bore or dig. So, um, like I said, they love Tovia Singer loves bringing that up, but he doesn't like he's being a dishonest chicken nugget, you know? He doesn't
Yeah.
shout out, the reason why I say dishonest chicken nugget is because shout out to Radar Apologetics. He's a Messianic rabbi, and he calls
Mm.
Tovia Singer, he calls Jason Sabacoli all chicken nuggets. They're all chicken nuggets. They're scared of us. So, um
That's
this
funny.
is what I'm talking about. So you bring up one manuscript that the rabbis today have a biased viewpoint, but you don't want to bring up any of the other manuscripts, which brings up Kuru, not Karari, Kuru.
Right.
So
So what you're saying is that there is a like what I heard from Dr. Michael Brown was that there is a one letter difference in the Hebrew that changes the way that we translate this passage, and there are manuscripts on both sides, but there are manuscript evidence to justify it saying pierced rather than
yes,
like a lion or bore through. Right.
yeah, and like I said, Rashi, this ancient sage, he says it's Pierce. So
Gotcha. I know that one of the things that he says is like the foundation of Judaism is belief in the Messiah's coming. But I've heard
mhm.
that there are Jews today that don't even believe in the Messiah.
Yes, that's because they go based by um that's because they go based by, more of a Sadducee type of perspective, that they're just focused on the Torah. They're not
Gotcha.
focused on any of the prophets, they're not focused on any of that, everything's Torah, Torah, Torah. So they don't really focus on any of the prophets, which is really sad to me.
Do they only accept the first five, or do they have the others? They just interpret them very differently. So,
They just only accept the 5 books. Uh They're like, in the Torah, it doesn't mention a Mashiach.
mm,
That's one of their arguments, and it's like, well, it does. Read Genesis 3:15.
mm, yeah, yeah, I would agree with you there. Do the manuscripts that have the word pierce come earlier, or are they dated about the same time? What are your thoughts on that?
They came. The word pierce once again comes from the Hebrew word karu, and it's coming from the times of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's a very old text. It's not
Okay,
a early text. It's a late text.
okay, but there are Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts that have the word pierced in Psalm 22.
Yes,
Is what you
absolutely.
gotcha. Okay. Uh, that's really interesting. Okay. So, uh, what other ways would you argue that Jesus is in fact the Messiah? And like I said, Jesus and not some other figure, and that the other interpretations that are used for these passages ultimately do not work.
Yeah. Um, So how I would put it is there's a lot of rabbinical writings of talking about Mashiach, right? So one of the ones is that when Messiah comes, right? This is a midrash, and this is all written. So I have this book. It's called Messiah's Text. It's written by of Dr. Phi, and he's a rabbinical scholar, and he talks about what would it be like during the Messianic age. Messianic age is a long period of time. It's the first time of Messiah coming, death, resurrection, things like that. Well, when he first comes, one of the things is he is not coming to uh he's not coming to necessarily agree with everything that uh um how do I put it? He's not coming to agree what the rabbis are teaching. He's coming to correct them. That's one of the midrash.
Really?
Yeah, coming to correct them, and that
Mm,
Israel doesn't really need his teaching, but the correction coming from his teaching, and he's coming for the exiles, which we see in the book of John,
mm,
right? In the book of John, who does he go up to? He comes to the Samaritan woman at the
this
well.
yeah,
And what does she say? She says, "Are you better than our ancestor Jacob?" She's an exile. So, sh so he's coming to give 30 mitzvot, 30 commandments to, uh, the exiles. Well, let's not take that 30 literally. Let's go look at gematria. The Hebrew word for 30 in gematria is, shaloshim. Shaloshim means to mourn. So it's the suffering servant's commandments, which is love God with all your heart and
gotcha.
love Hashem, uh, love love your neighbor as I loved you. And here's another cool thing. There's a midrash tapiat. It says that Mashiach will expound on the new Torah. When it's saying new, it doesn't mean brand new, like it's replacing something. This is the new perspective, the interpretation, the correct one compared to the rabbis.
Gotcha. That's actually a really interesting concept because um, there is a lot of debate, as we both know, right?
Yeah.
In Judaism and in Christianity.
Hmm.
I think I mean, I don't know about the Christian tradition, but I specifically see in the Jewish tradition that debate is like if Judaism does anything, they debate.
Yes, that's our thing. We
Right?
love
So
debating.
yeah.
Like,
So it's cool that there is a rabbinical teaching that, yeah, the Messiah will come back and correct us. And I think that Christians have a similar sentiment, right? Because, the Calvinist and Arminian will like hold hands, right? And say eventually Jesus is going to come, he's going to save both of us, and both of us are going to figure out what we needed to correct, right?
yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like these concepts, resurrection of the dead. There is a Hasidic folktale song that talks about Moshiach ben David will come resurrect the dead. Like we have,
Hmm.
yeah.
Because I've heard that the concept of resurrection in Judaism is, well, I guess in that instance it would be, but like always it's always a physical body and it's always apocalyptic in some way.
It is. So like for example, right? Uh the resurrection of the dead, if the Lord wills. See, such um so the resurrection of the dead. How do I put this? The resurrection of the dead when it comes to King Messiah is completely a Jewish thought. So how is it a Jewish thought can be into Christianity? How do they are co-equal in a way? Well, let's put it this way. There's a prayer that we sing 3 times a day when we dafen. Dafen is a form of prayer. So one of these prayers has to do with uh, the patriarch, and it has to do with the future redeemer from the patriarch. It's called Avot, and Avot has to do with the patriarch. So that being said, there's one thing that says he is the resurrector of the dead.
Mm,
And if you look in the Jewish commentary of Art Scroll is a person who makes sidurs, he makes Talmuds and all this. He said that in the future to come, Holy One, blessed be He, will have Mashiach give life, resurrect the dead, like a planter that how do I put it? A planter that washes the garden and restores life to the flowers.
Mm, mm. What is the dating of the sources that you're mentioning? Are they, because I don't, I like I said, I would know, I'm terribly ignorant about a lot of this, but
Mhm.
I could imagine someone saying, well, a lot of the reasons why they're saying this stuff is because of Christian influence. So, would you say the sources that you're quoting are around the time of Jesus, or are they like way after?
I'd
And
say way before.
so they're before.
Way before. They're not a lot of the sources I'm quoting, besides like I've quoted some Rambam and some Rashi. A lot of the sources I'm quoting are from first century Second Temple Judaism.
Really, that's really interesting to me. That's very interesting. We have a question in the chat here. Is there any insight on the sect of the Qumran community where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found? Um,
Yes.
are you talking about the Essenes?
Yeah, he's talking about the Essenes.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
So, yes, the Essenes had their own sorry, my screen went black again. The Essenes had their own halakha.
Quick question: what is halakha?
Halakha is okay, so halakha is Jewish law. So when you look in the Talmud and you see, oh, Mishnah, that's Jewish law. Halakha, that's Jewish law. So it describes a mitzvot that how you're supposed to do it. So they had their own halakha. Let's put it this way: they were so strict with their halakha, they were stricter than the Pharisees.
The Essenes?
Yes, the Essenes.
Yeah,
They were
yeah. I've
a
heard them
really
at this at my university in class. I've heard them, and in preaching here, I've heard them be compared, like the Essenes, just to help people today in the 21st century conceptualize it, that the Essenes have been compared to like ultra conservatives, where like the Pharisees would be the conservatives, the
Mhm.
Sadducees might be the liberals, theologically speaking at the time. So would that be like an accurate generalization to help people understand kind of the distinction between
So
the two? Or is
so
it a little more
the
complicated?
so the Pharisees, their sect came around. It's so interesting because the Pharisees and the Essenes came around the time of Ezra. That's when the sect really start popping off. And the Pharisees, and this is what I tell Christians all the time, the Pharisees in the Pharisee sect in general wasn't a bad sect. It was a sect that you would want to be a part of because they knew the scriptures. I would say that the Pharisees, like scholarly wise, were like the Calvinists today.
Mm,
Uh
that would be an interesting comparison.
yeah, they were the Calvinists today. Like they were like super in depth in scripture. They understood it, but their problem was their political position.
Mm,
Their politics became a part of their theology. And that's why you see Jesus uh in Mark 12, no, not Mark 12, Mark 7, where he's like, are you doing the mitzvot of washing your hands before you eat the bread? And Jesus is like, dude, that's not a mitzvah. Like, that's not a mitzvah, bro. Like, what are you talking about? So, so we
so
see that.
can we say the Essenes were the Anabaptists of the Jewish tradition?
What's Anabaptist? I'm not aware of this term. What is that?
Um, how could you describe an Anabaptist?
Because I got some cool stuff to show you guys if you want to talk about what the Essenes taught and all that. I have a cool thing after you describe what Anabaptist is because I'm confused.
Yeah, no, you're good. So the Anabaptists, Anna being the Greek word again, a member of a fringe radical movement of the Protestant Reformation and spiritual ancestor of modern Baptists, Mennonites, and Quakers. Uh, their most distinct tenet was adult baptism. So they wanted to wait until you were adults and converted, I believe. I believe I remember learning about them when I sat in church.
In a way, I guess, but,
Yeah.
if you wanna know about a lot of things that were going on in the 1st century, um, I don't like most do you know what the Didache is?
Yeah, I've actually read the Didache a few
I
different.
don't like how most Didaches are written. They have this, like, Protestant or Catholic bias. So
Oh,
I
really?
really Yeah, yeah, I really suggest people getting The Way of Life, a Messianic Jewish Didache, and it's pretty much the Didache, it's the same Didache in the Greek and everything, but this Didache has ancient 1st century commentary, and it talks of Josephus talks about how John the Baptist believed when it came to baptism. He says, Josephus himself says that uh, the Essenes didn't necessarily believe there was like this remission of sin that's going on. They
Mhm.
kind of more believed that it was preparing for the new bodies for the world to come, which is Olam Haba.
Mm, gotcha. So,
So
dude, I've heard this idea that John the Baptist isn't a scene, but
he
I
is.
haven't seen any evidence of that. I don't know if you hold that view, if you're saying Josephus
Mhm.
says that.
Yeah, Josephus is pretty much implying that.
Gotcha.
That's
Oh,
why he's implying that with the antiquity of the Jews, that he was more on the Essenes. The Essenes believed kind of in the way of they were kinda, like, crazy, though. That's the thing, like, the things were crazy, so it kind of fits John the Baptist because he was crazy. Uh, what's a Protestant bias? So, a Protestant bias will say, like, for example, the Eucharist, right? People will say that the Eucharist is more of a new, uh So the Protestant bias would be like, oh, the Eucharist and the communion. This is not a Jewish concept. This is more of a like this new church thing. But that's not true because Jews were doing communion. Uh like for example, Shabbat, right? Shabbat is communion. And how is it
what is
communion?
Shabbat exactly?
Shabbat is the Sabbath. So a Sabbath service in the 1st century was a form of communion. You had the bread, you had the wine, and you had the
Oh,
Kiddush cup,
okay.
and you broke the bread with the wine. And that's what the early century believers believed in. They believed that this was the uh the communion. Same thing with the Eucharist. The word Eucharist doesn't necessarily have to do with bread. It just means give thanks. Every day is a form of Eucharist. Let
Yeah.
me explain. So, in Jewish custom, Jews ate bread with everything. They
Mm.
ate challah with everything. So, what they do is there's a blessing called it's called the Barokut, and the Barokut has to do actually it's Barokut Chamotzi, and it's Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
What's that
Chamotzi halachem min haaretz. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us bread from the earth. And that's addressing all food because most of the food at the time was with bread.
Mm,
So when I'm saying Protestant bias, it's like not going back to what the 1st century was
okay.
going to.
I see what
That's
you mean.
what I mean by Protestant
So
bias.
so sometimes when they translate the Didache, there is that bias to not
Mhm.
see the Eucharist, the communion as a Jewish thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm more saying.
Okay,
'Cause it is a Jewish thing, it is. Shabbat, one of the services on Friday nights, it's communion, so when people ask a Messianic, like, "Oh, when do you do communion?" "Every Shabbat."
gotcha. Okay,
I
okay.
see another question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So did the Essenes believe the Messiah would only come when the new kingdom was established? No. So, the Essenes, it's so funny. Do you want to know why the Essenes kind of like disappeared? It's because they became uh they became right. They became part of the Nazarenes.
Mm,
You know, they became the Nazarenes, which were the
yeah.
Messianic believers. So John the Baptist, as it is seen, is baptizing people, and he's saying, "Prepare the way for Messiah." And then Messiah shows up. The Essenes are over. There's no point of the Essenes. We have
Gotcha.
to go
So
to
that's what you would say is that the Essene movement just folded into this group of Nazarenes that
yeah, this
believed
group
in
of
Messiah.
Nazarene Jews.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of just what happened. That's why they kind of just like fell off the face of the planet.
Yeah, yeah, because
Yeah. So
you definitely don't see them afterwards. Um, so one of the so, real quick though, before we move on to a different subject, is there anything else you wanna bring up with regards to Jesus, evidence that Jesus is the Messiah as talked about in the Old Testament?
Not really. I kind of just went over everything I've been talking about in my podcast, pretty
Gotcha.
much.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so we can definitely, shift gears here. So, tell us about mystical Judaism because I have no idea what the heck's going on there. I'm be
Yeah.
totally honest with
People make the assumption. Uh, how do I put it? People make the assumption that like Jewish mystical thought is only in the Kabbalah, and that's not true.
you.
Um, that's just that's just not actually true. Um, sorry, my screen keeps going black. I don't know why.
Mm,
Um, you know, it's so not true. So the Kabbalah was conformed by this rabbi. His name was uh, Moshe de Leon. He was a Spanish Jew, and he grabbed ancient uh, Jewish mystical ideas and fit it into the Kabbalah. So,
okay, wait, so Jewish mysticism ended up folding into the Kabbalah at a later point in time?
yeah, so Jewish mysticism is an ancient thought, but Kabbalah is the different teachings formatted into different books. So they're
Okay,
grabbing
so
ancient
Kabbalah
scrolls.
right. Okay, so Kabbalah and mystical Judaism are not precisely the same thing.
Yeah, not exactly. It doesn't
Okay.
exactly work that way. So, like, for example, when I was mentioning Pardes, a part of it is Jewish mysticism. One of the hermeneutical ways to interpret scripture, which is called sod teaching, when I'm grabbing gematria and I'm fitting words, right?
Mm.
So that's where Jewish mysticism is an ancient thought, but Kabbalah, like the Zohars, some of these are newer sources. They're not ancient sources, and
Zohar is like 14th century, right?
14th century, 15th, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
like
Okay.
either right during or right after the Inquisition.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So what I heard was that there was Jewish people who were attempting to have the kinds of experiences that Ezekiel had. And that is what was the very origins of this mystical sort of Judaism, which then
Mm,
is I don't know if that's true or not. That's just what I have.
Not necessarily, because Jewish mysticism is to find the deep meaning within the Tanakh. It's the deepest form. So, like, for example, right, there's the Zohar of creation, where it's talking about God creates wisdom. He makes all things with his wisdom, and wisdom is in us because we are the image bearers of God. Like things like that.
That kind of s- that kind of sh- that sounds very similar to Justin Martyr's conception of the logos. Yeah.
Yeah, so, there's a so Jewish mysticism, uh, it's so interesting. Have you ever heard of Philo?
Yes.
Philo Judaeus? He was a Jewish Hellenistic mystic, and he talks about the logos.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
talks
So you
about
would
the
say that
logo.
he wasn't just a Hellenistic Jew or a Jew that was influenced by Greek thought. You would also say that he engaged in
Mysticism, yeah,
mysticism. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
absolutely.
so would you say that because I don't know if this is a different thing, but I did a whole research project um back a little while back because my friend told me she was a Satanist for a really long time. She came to Christ later on. And one of the things that she mentioned to me was that she thought that she got that Solomon engaged in witchcraft and other sort of practices because he got his wisdom from Satan and then later turned over to God and things like that. So I was like, okay, where does this idea come from? And it's funny because what the result was, she did not like initially because as a Satanist, she had, especially as like the kind of theistic Satanist she was, she has this opposition towards Abrahamic religion. But I found that the first people who are thinking that Solomon's wisdom expands not to just like moral skill and great knowledge, but even to like mystical arts and
Mhm,
magic is Jewish people, like even of the first century, like Josephus tells us about an exorcism that was done where
mhm,
they would use like a put something on the nose of the person they were exercising that I believe had the name of Solomon on it. There is a Gnostic text, like a Jewish Gnostic text called the Apocalypse of Abraham or Adam, excuse me, where it's mentioned that Solomon is like controlling demons to chase down um, a woman and various kinds of things that I found. But my I don't know if that is at all related to mystical Judaism, but
no,
I
not
think
whatsoever,
it
and
is.
I think I know who you're talking about. I
Yeah.
think, is she on TikTok?
Oh, no, no, no. This was a friend I had years ago in high school.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So I see this a lot on TikTok where Satanist people have read the Kabbalah and they don't know what they're reading.
Mm.
And that's why the rabbis will say, hey, there's been people in the past who have misrepresented Kabbalah. A prime example of this is what's his name? Aleister Crowley.
Oh,
Hmm. Aleister
I
Crowley.
didn't know he read Jewish mysticism.
Yeah, so Aleister Crowley grabbed he grabbed Jewish mysticism and and that's why we tell people Jewish mysticism isn't a practice. Practice uh you don't practice Jewish mysticism. It's a understanding of scripture. That's all it is.
Gotcha.
And Aleister Crowley convinced himself that he could just draw a bunch of tree of life diagrams all throughout his house, and he lost his mind. He lost his mind,
That's
bro.
funny.
Like,
That's funny. I
yeah,
was
it is a
I
bit
was not aware
heretical.
of that. No, yeah, but I've been reading those texts and I found it because I like I said, I didn't know a whole lot about mystical Judaism, so I thought that this whole tradition of Solomon engaging in magic and like being able to control demons. I don't know if you read the Testament of Solomon, but like in there, he's having conversations with demons after he gets this like ring from Archangel Michael that allows him to control them, and he uses them to help build the temple and things like that. Um, that text is weird because it has all kinds of influence from different religious
Parts of the
ideas.
world, yeah.
Yeah, but I thought that idea was a part of mystical Judaism because I just didn't know how else to categorize this tradition that started in Judaism, goes into Gnosticism, ends up later on in Christian mysticism, in like the medieval era with things like the Key of Solomon and things like
Mhm.
that.
You're talking about the Lesser Key. I
Yeah,
have that
Key
book.
of Solomon, yeah. Yeah, so like So if this isn't like this whole strand of thought is not mystical Judaism necessarily, then what is there a category for this kind of thing?
Gnosticism.
Gotcha.
That's it. It's like a complete separate thing. It's not Jewish mystical thought. Like, it's just not. It's just not there. Like, and,
Okay.
eh, and like I said, I know many TikTokers that have come from Luciferian ideology,
Hmm.
and then they talk about how because they come from Luciferian ideology, they kinda just, like, overdwell on it, and they're like, "Yeah, the Talmud, it's Luciferian, the Kabbalah, it's Luciferian." I'm like, "No,
That
no."
sounds so weird.
Yeah, bro. I know a girl on TikTok, and I had to recently block her because she was like, "I'm not anti-Semitic because I think the Talmud is Luciferian." I'm like,
Oh, that's so bad.
that's so bad. You gotta chill out with that because you don't know what you're reading. It's
I've only
oh,
read a little bit of the Talmud, and I can tell that it's not that at all.
yeah, it's not. It's just like, just imagine a bunch of New York Jews arguing with each other.
That's-
That's all it is. Like, literally, that's all it is. Unless it says halakha and Mishnah, that's how you know it's a official belief within Judaism.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
so that's why I do appreciate Jewish mysticism, especially Philo's work, because it puts you in perspective. Like, for example, like Jesus, right? He
Yeah.
talks about forgiving your brother 70, I believe it's 70 times 7,
Yeah, something
right?
like that, yeah.
So 70 times 7 has to do with like complete reconciliation and complete peace within each other and to love perfectly. That's literally what it's saying. What Jesus is saying, to love perfectly, to forgive.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. Um, yeah. No, I found that really interesting. I particularly when I was doing my research into that, I found it really interesting that uh I would have to go back and grab my sources. I should actually do like a video on that because that would be a really fun, weird thing to dive into. Is like the legend surrounding King Solomon. Because in
Mhm.
that, like, research, I found a bunch of different things. I found the story of Solomon interacting with I mentioned this before, but Asmodeus in the Talmud. I found, there's a text that mentions Solomon flying on a carpet.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah.
which the History Channel just took that and ran with it, dog. They literally have a video on YouTube where they're like, "Yeah, this text says that Solomon flew on a carpet, and that carpet was definitely a UFO."
Oh my gosh, aliens. Like like
It's, it's so weird.
it's crazy, bro.
Yeah.
It's crazy that what these people come up with my people's texts. Like, I just laugh sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, this one dude on TikTok, he was like, in the Kabbalah, they worship angels. And I'm like,
That's not
uh, are you referring to Metatron? Because that's not in the Kabbalah. You won't find that nowhere in the Kabbalah.
Oh, Metatron is not a because
No.
isn't oh, well, yeah, okay. But I thought 3rd Enoch isn't that a mystical Jewish text, or am I wrong?
Okay, so this is what people have to understand. When they're quoting sources, it doesn't like for example, it would be like me looking into the Tanakh and I'm saying, "Oh, the Tanakh, this part of the Tanakh is saying this." Does that mean the Tanakh is a mystical book? Does that mean the Tanakh is part of the Talmud? No, it just means it's quoting a source. So they're quoting on a source that's a Gnostic source.
Okay.
But but once again, uh, in Judaism, it's not like Christianity in the sense of like absolutes, right? So like absolute belief is that you have to believe in the Trinity,
Right.
right? So like I don't have to agree with the rabbi who's talking about Metatron.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And most Jews don't. Most Jews, they'll tell you,
Yeah.
"That's a crazy text. We don't get into that."
Right.
Like
Right. But I thought I coulda swore I remember reading about Third Enoch, right? Um,
Mhm,
if you guys don't know, there are different books that bear the name Enoch. They don't all tell the same story, so they're not sequels of each other. Um,
mhm,
but I would argue First Enoch casts Enoch as the divine son of man. Second Enoch casts him as the progenitor of the Melchizedekian priesthood, and
mhm.
third Enoch casts him as the archangel Metatron from Jewish tradition, which I found sources about Metatron going back to the second, third century with like the Talmud and other things. But uh, no, yeah, I found it interesting, and I could have swore with, like, the way they described the levels of heaven, not just that they describe it, because the Enochic tradition does that, but, like, the way it's described and the way these things are talked about, it seemed um, like a version of mystical Judaism to me that took into account this.
I could see
Yeah,
that. I could see
especially
that.
with the
Um,
rabbi, like, ascending into the heavens to get all of these divine revelations and go deeper into the reality of of,
mhm.
uh of, the spiritual world and all that sort of stuff, so, like I said, I could be wrong, but I coulda swore I do remember reading that from a few different sources.
It's so funny that you mentioned, Son of Man, because that title, the title is something that's complicated, but yet simple. Um, so, for example, if Ezekiel 28, literally the first verse, it talks about how Adonai, the word of Adonai, Devar Adonai, which is a divine title, by the way, in Judaism.
Mm,
Um, Devar Adonai tells Ezekiel, but when he tells Ezekiel, Ezekiel is called Ben Adom.
mhm,
So the word Ben Adom doesn't necessarily always is referring to the divine Son of Man.
right,
It's not always referring to that. Sometimes it's just referring to Son of Humanity. That's the usual meaning.
right,
But when you see the word Ha Ben Adom, right? It's referring to the divine title. Anything that has the word "cha" in it, it's like V only. Uh, like for example, Mashiach. Mashiach, Messiah, is in the Old Testament. They call Prince of Persia a prince, anointed one,
mm,
which is Mashiach, but he's not the Mashiach. Same thing with the Book of Enoch. When you go to the Book of Enoch, if you go to it's because I have a Hebrew one. I have a Hebrew one that
okay, okay,
so when I'm looking into that, it doesn't say Ha Ben Adom. It just says Ben Adom, which just means son of man.
gotcha, okay, have you read, chapter 71?
I have to look in that.
Okay.
Hold on a sec.
'Cause we could definitely talk about that. Because there was another scholar who mentioned this too, but, chapters, starting somewhere in, like, 38 or 39, it begins the 3 big parables, right, in the Book of Enoch, and they're definitely about the Messiah, like, there are several different times where it uses the phrase "son of man" and these other texts to refer, or these other titles to refer to this one individual, uh,
Yeah.
who is divine, right? Who will judge the world and all these sorts of things. And then chapter 71 seems to be the climax of this big speech about the end times and different things and the Messiah.
What verse?
Verse 14. Verse 14.
Okay.
So in the context of 71, you see this like big, um, I think, setting for a big reveal where the angels become present and God shows up and he says, "Yeah, you are the Son of Man, born to righteousness, and the righteousness of the head of days covers you." And
Yeah, so once again, right? So this it's so funny because this exact verse that you're mentioning, the rabbis quote it for the Targum and Midrash, and they state it's not about Enoch.
Oh, really? So, do
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't wait a minute. So, I need the source, because I could use
Yeah.
that for my own Enoch studies and stuff, but I did not know that there were Jewish sources who ever quoted First Enoch.
Yeah, they quote first Enoch, they quote, the righteousness of the head of days,
Gotcha.
right? So they quote that part what you just mentioned.
Okay.
This is the Son of Man, and they abide, and righteousness abides over him, and all the righteousness of the head of days
Yep.
forsakes him not. Yeah, this is the exact source I'm talking about. Yeah, so the rabbis say that this is not referring to Enoch, but this is referring to the future Messiah, Mashiach ben David.
That's really interesting, okay. I'm not sure I'm I'm not sure I could I'm not sure I would agree there. I mean, granted, it would be pretty convenient for me to argue that the Book of Enoch is not scripture because of this. Um, but
Mhm.
it looks like in the context they're addressing Enoch, right? That's
Yeah, that's what it seems
yeah,
like. That's what it seems like, and this is why I tell people, like, when you're reading these sources, just like how we exegete the verses, we gotta exegete what's being said here. So, it seems like that, but the part that gets me, uh, the part that gets me is, uh, when it brings up the angel came to me and greeted me in his voice and said unto me, "This is the Son of Man." That Hebrew word where he's saying "this is more of a pointing to
oh,
something than it is him addressing, saying, "Hey, Enoch, you're the Son of Man."
gotcha. That might be where the disagreement is. So, uh
Yeah.
as far as I'm aware, scholars argue that the best translation is "you are" rather than "this is" because, R.H. Charles translated it as "this is" because he thought it would be
Mhm.
weird to have Enoch be identified as the Messiah, but even R.H. Charles in the footnotes, mentions the other translation, "you are," and so he
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it really depends on what manuscript it comes from, and it really depends on what's being understood and what the original language says, because the original language, it either says, like you were saying, "you are," or "this," and the word that says "this" is more of a pointing Hebrew language, like, "This is the Son of Man."
yeah,
Um,
which would be
I personally don't think Enoch should be in the canon. I don't
yeah,
think so.
yeah,
Um, I don't think so at all, but I think it's just like Maccabees, it could be used for a historical philosophical text more than a scriptural God breath text.
gotcha. I would say the best way to use Enoch would be to see if there is influence of in the New Testament with Enoch, as like Dr. Michael Heiser argues, and I would say that it would
Mhm.
help us in our understanding of Second Temple Judaism. Is
It was definitely prominent back then. It was prominent between 500 BC and to 70 AD. So,
yeah, yeah. Well, I might adjust the time because I Enoch was probably written somewhere in like the third, fourth century, BC to like first
yeah,
century BC, right? Something like that. So, but yeah, no, it was definitely prominent. I would say until Augustine, and
yeah.
I think did well. Augustine did a really good job of refuting the Book of Enoch. Jerome didn't include Enoch. Right, and so it starts falling out of favor after the 300s, I would say, but particularly with people like Augustine. I should actually do a video on this because people have because there's a quote from Tertullian when Tertullian he actually defends the Book of Enoch, and Tertullian being a old church father, um, And so he defends the Book of Enoch in like chapter 2 or 3 of his Apparel on Women, or the Apparel of Women. Um, and but so one of the videos I want to do is compare Tertullian's defense of the Book of Enoch with Augustine's rejection of the Book of Enoch, and see which one stands up today in light of uh the research, the body of research growing around that book.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, because, like I said before, the rabbis quote from it, to talk about Mashiach ben David.
Okay. You would
Uh,
have to are you talking about the rabbis that's in the book you're quoting, or you're talking about like a rabbi in like the first century AD or afterwards?
like, 1st century AD, these
Really?
are rabbis and sages.
Okay. That's really
So
interesting. That's weird because I have an entire Google Doc where have nothing but quotes of like the first 5 centuries that relate to the Book of Enoch or the character of Enoch, and I never found where a rabbi used the Enochic text. I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm just saying
yeah.
I've not.
Yeah, I could definitely send you pictures of it.
Yeah. No, that would be really really cool to have. Uh,
In fact, there's a section, some rabbinical texts are not, like, on Sefaria or, like, mainstream rabbinical websites, so you
oh,
have
okay,
so
gotcha.
so you have to really dig deep onto that. But I have this book, like I said, it's called The Messiah's Text, and there's some that quote out of the Book of Enoch, and they talk about the pre-existence of Messiah. Like, they quote the Book of Enoch, the part where I just said uh he was around before the Lord of Spirits, and then they quote who is Messiah's name, and then they say Adonai is his name.
Ooh. Mm, that is really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff, man. I got so many, like,
Uh,
rabbinical stuff.
yeah, you definitely gotta send that to me. Uh,
Yeah, bro. I'll send it after
yeah,
this.
for sure, for sure. So, this is a really interesting topic. So, one of the things that I heard when now, before I mention this, I will say, I don't really care about politics. I'm, much more interested the, uh in the, theology, philosophy, that kind of thing,
Mhm.
not so much
Yeah.
into politics. But when Roe v. Wade happened, right, then it was overturned. I found a lot of pro-choicers who were citing and going back to Jewish texts, and Jews themselves going back
Mhm.
to Jewish texts that they said supported their
Abortion.
yeah, their
Yeah.
kind of stance. So, real quick, I want to read something here. This is from the My Jewish Learning, and in this paper, um, they say that while Judaism takes a far less stringent approach to abortion than do many pro life denominations of Christianity, providing explicit exceptions for threats to a mother's life and rabbinic support for terminating a pregnancy in a host of other situations, there is nonetheless a broad objection to abortion in cases without serious cause. And
Mhm.
it goes down here and says, in Jewish law, a fetus attains the status of full personhood only at birth. Sources in the Talmud indicate that prior to the 40 days of gestation, the fetus has an even more limited legal status, with one Talmudic authority, and it quotes that one, asserting that prior to 40 days, the fetus is mere water. Elsewhere, the Talmud indicates that the ancient rabbis regarded a fetus as part of the mother throughout the pregnancy, dependent fully on her for its life, a view that echoes the position that women should be free to make decisions concerning their bodies. But it does give some balance here. So it says that at the same time, feticide is prohibited by Jewish law, though there is disagreement over the exact source of this prohibition and how serious the infraction is. Some consider it biblical in origin based on Genesis 9:6 that prohibits shedding the blood of man within man, a phrase understood to refer to a fetus. Moreover,
Mhm.
Judaism teaches that the body is ultimately the property of God and is merely a loan to human beings. multiple prohibitions in Jewish law, including prohibitions on suicide, getting tattoos, and wounding oneself, collectively serve to reject the idea that individuals enjoy a unfettered right to make choices regarding their own bodies. So,
Mhm.
as far as I understand, it sounds like it's a debate and both sides could pull from
It's not
those.
halakha.
Gotcha. So it's
So we
Jewish
have
law.
this thing in Judaism, right,
Mhm.
called binding halakha. So if it like I said, if the rabbis don't all come to agreement, it's a hypothesis. So, for example, this is a situation. Hello. This is a situation where it's like a what if scenario. If it's causing harm to, uh, some rabbis would say, let's do it. But that's not halakha. So
Mm,
you can't say,
so it's not binding
the
law.
it's not binding law. So it's really just an opinion. You're just stating an opinion. Oh, well, it says it in the Talmud. Well, no, it doesn't. It just says that a what if scenario in case a woman's deeply in trouble during pregnancy. But even then, it's not halakha.
Gotcha. Okay, so what do you what is your understanding of like their take on Genesis 9:6 that the it prohibits shedding the blood of man within man, which could be understood as a
Mm.
reference to the fetus.
Yeah, that could be a reference to the fetus. I could see that
Okay.
because like the word man, right? The word man can just like I said, the word Adom can refer to mankind in general. It doesn't always refer to like
Like,
a
right.
male.
Okay.
So,
Okay, gotcha. So what would be so based on like I said, your religious views, what would you say on the topic of abortion then from a Jewish perspective?
in a Jewish perspective, like I said, what they're mentioning is not binding halakha. Not only that it's not binding halakha, based by scripture alone, based by the Tanakh in the Torah, well, actually the prophets, Jeremiah, Hashem tells Jeremiah, I knew you before you were even in your mother's womb. So how can he know something that isn't uh, he knew it his pre-existence and he knew him while he was in the womb, which means that he was alive.
Okay. So would you
So
so yeah, so would you say that so I guess help me kind of understand here. How would you use this passage in Jeremiah in order to argue for the personhood, you might say, of the or the yeah, the personhood of the fetus?
well, based by what you just stated, Genesis, isn't it Genesis 9:6,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so based by Genesis 9:6 and based by Jeremiah, God doesn't want any blood to be shed, regardless of it being in the womb or not.
gotcha. Okay.
Mhm,
Okay, I see. So one of the things though that people would bring up is Numbers chapter 5. Have you heard
mhm.
this argument?
Yes, I've heard heard this
Okay.
argument.
So we'll get to this real quick. Uh So if anyone doesn't know, Numbers chapter 5, here we it talks about the purity of the camp, restitution for wrongs, and then there is the ordeal of the woman or the test of the unfaithful wife. It says here, then the Lord said to Moses, I won't read this entire thing because it's a lot, but it says, then the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites, say to them, if a man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him so that another man has relations with her, and this is hidden from her husband and her impurity is undetected since there's no witness. And if feelings of jealousy come over her husband and he suspects his wife that she is impure, or if he is jealous and suspects her, uh, even though she's not impure, then he is to take the wife to the priest. He must also take an offering of a tenth of ephah of barley on her behalf. He must not pour olive oil on it or put incense on it because it is a grain offering of jealousy, a reminder offering to draw attention to wrongdoing. So it continues on. The it looks like uh, you can read this passage here for yourself or go to Numbers chapter 5. But the way that people read this passage is that uh, whether it's God or the priest, if she has committed adultery during this trial, she would be pregnant. And so when the priest has her drink this and then she's found guilty, again, whether this is the drink itself given to the priest or it's God himself, a abortion is what's caused because it's
Mhm.
meant to terminate the pregnancy as a consequence of her sin if she's guilty. So I guess that would be the steel manning their position, make their position the best it could be. That is what they would argue is going on here. So what would your response be to that?
My response would be, especially to their to their community, is once again, it's the woman saying, "Hey, I want to have an abortion."
Mm, she is
Okay,
not.
she's not saying that. She most likely doesn't want to have this being done to her. This is
Mhm.
a punishment. This isn't something that's like, "Oh my gosh, we want to do this."
Yeah.
No. So, my argument would be this is this mitzvah that's going on in here has nothing to do with what you're claiming. It has nothing to do with it. It's like me being like, it's like thou shall not murder, right?
Mhm.
And me being like, hey, um, you know, it says thou shalt not murder, right?
Yeah.
So it's like me being like, I'm trying to give a good example of it, but it's like me being like, yeah, you shouldn't murder. That means, but you see right here in Joshua, he clearly murdered somebody. No, he was
I see. Yeah,
commanded.
I see what you're trying to get at. Yeah, but
No,
obviously these are two different situations.
yes, these are two different scenarios. You going around saying, you know, I don't mean to say this on YouTube, but like, oh yeah, let's unalive this baby, and then her being like, "Oh, I'm an adulteress and I don't want my baby to die." These are 2 different scenarios. You can't use that. So in a sense, it's
Gotcha.
kinda straw manning in a way.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know that, you see it here in the New English translation, but it says, "May the Lord cause you to become a curse among your people when he makes your womb miscarry and your adamant, uh, uh, I don't know why I can't abdomen. Thank you. Abdomen swell. May this water bring a curse in your body that the abdomen swell and you will miscarry. So there are some translations that say miscarry. I like to check the New English translation a lot. Uh, but the New English translation does have uh, a footnote here. But I know that there are some who are arguing that this isn't a miscarriage. This is infertility. So this curse that would be brought upon the woman uh, would be a in reference to uh, a infertility.
Okay.
Yeah. So like here, there's a footnote here. It says the TOV makes the oppression in your thigh is a euphemism for the genitals. So it's caused your genital organs to shrink. Uh, and
You
your
used the TLV, you used the Tree of Life?
the TEV.
Oh, the TEV, I thought it was,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Yep, and then, they have a footnote here. It says, "Most commentators take the expressions to be euphemisms of miscarriage or stillbirth, meaning that there would be no fruit from a illegitimate union. The idea that the abdomen swelling has been reinterpreted by the NEB to mean fall away. If this interpretation stands, then the idea is that the woman has become pregnant and that has aroused the suspicion of the husband for, some reason." Quotes a source there for that. And it says discusses a variety of other explanations for diseases and conditions that might be described by these terms. He translated it as miscarriage, but leaves it open to what description might actually be. So, yeah, this understanding that I know that, like I said, that there was some people who said it was infertility because of um, this last verse here where it says, "When a woman we us, when the angels come over her, life, Lord, and the priest on the law, then the man will be free from iniquity, but that won't bear the consequence of her iniquity." the woman become a curse. But if she has not defiled herself and she is clean, she will be free from ill effects and she will be able to bear children. So some people have argued from that this is infertility. So I just want to get your thoughts on that. But there's another passage though that for me, um, this was more difficult to deal with. To me, it seems obvious that okay, even if Numbers 5 is an abortion, it has nothing to do with what you're arguing, but it's probably not. It's probably miscarriage or infertility, which is a different thing. But uh, have you heard people argue from Exodus 21?
Yes, I've heard that argument. Oh my
Yes,
god.
where verse 22 says, "When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman, so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. If there is no harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, and so on." So uh I don't remember the entirety of the debate, but a lot of debate has to do with what this phrase means. What does it mean that her child come out, but there is no harm? How we translate that? Um, the A lot of translations will say there's a miscarriage here. I'm not sure what translations I could search, but if 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 this is a yeah, so some have argued that it's a premature birth. Um, it may be indicated that the child was killed as in a miscarriage, or it may be that there's a premature birth. So, but basically, abortion advocates are going to argue that if this is a miscarriage, then that means that if the baby dies as a result of this conflict, then all that's going to happen is that you'll have to pay a fine. But if something else happens, i.e., something happens to the woman, then it's life for life, tooth for tooth, and so on. So I guess I would ask you, how would you deal with that argument?
I'll deal with this argument as once again, right? It's not like because it's not and this is what I mean by this community, especially the reformed Jews, which we will talk in a little bit about, LGBT. Um, the reformed Jews love to use these arguments, but what they fail to understand is it's not uh it's not I love to call this a what's it called fallacy? Equating fallacy.
Oh, equivocation.
Yes, it's equivocation fallacy. So they'll say, "Oh, you know, we support abortion, and right here it says that the baby will have a miscarriage. The woman will have a miscarriage. So obviously God is okay for miscarriages. That means He's okay with abortion." No, it doesn't. This is absolutely incorrect. These are scenarios of people sinning against God.
Mm,
These aren't scenarios where God is like, you know, if you're struggling, if you could just unalive your baby anytime you want. These are situations. Once again, these are situations in
okay.
the Torah. These are not things that are like God is demanding. These are scenarios.
Yeah.
And some of these scenarios are not normative. Like this, for example, this is not a normative scenario. This is like a what if.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know that the argument that I've heard has been that if this is miscarriage and all you do if the baby dies is pay a fine, then that means that the Mosaic law is not recognizing the fetus as a human being. Because if it did, then it would entail um, lex talionis, right? Either the hand for hand, the eye for eye, tooth for tooth, or the death penalty. So one of those two, and that's what I've seen people argue. Like,
Oh, but once again, like the eye for eye, the tooth for tooth, that's a Jewish idiom, and that refers to when you're like taking someone's life.
mm,
So that's what God is saying. Like, listen, if this, you know, in a way, if this child is harmed, it's on your hands. Like it's
right,
it's very prominent. So,
Gotcha. Okay.
you
Yeah,
know,
that's understandable. Me personally, I still struggle with the miscarriage sort of view.
yeah.
I'm not someone who believes that the Mosaic Law is perfect anyway. So even if this were the case, then it wouldn't necessarily bother me, because we have a different covenant now. We're in a different situation. Um, but uh, it like I said, I find that argument personally to be compelling. Like I said, if the Hebrew term is miscarriage instead of premature birth. But,
Yeah.
um, but I get what your point too, that this is a particular scenario. So uh, even if there is like even if this is a miscarriage, it's still not abortion, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And even if they're not recognizing the personhood of the fetus in this situation, which it could very well just be that the scenario that is in play here is when a man is accidentally hitting a woman. Right, and we
Yeah.
know in the Mosaic Law too that the penalty for accidents is not as severe as the penalty for intentional homicide, right?
Yeah.
So, I would agree with you. I don't think this verse gets us where the pro-choicer would wanna go, uh, even
Yeah.
if
Absolutely not.
yeah,
Nope.
yeah, very interesting stuff there. So, the other thing that I've heard a lot is a discussion in Judaism about homosexuality.
Mhm.
So, talking specifically about that, I will share my screen here again. This is also from my Jewish learning. I just found it to be really, really good. Um, so, it says here, talking about the Old Testament, it says, as evident by the language, the biblical prohibition does not extend to female homosexual acts, although later commentators disproved of lesbianism. One rabbinical source associates female homosexuality with the activities of the Egyptians and Canaanites, from which the Jews were supposed to abstain. Other authorities describe lesbianism as lewd and promiscuous, but do not consider it a capital offense. The Levitical verses also imply that this is the act of homosexual sex, not the person that is abhorred, which is a really, really good point to make there. It says much attention has been given to the word abomination, though the terminology seems callous, the same word is used in Deuteronomy 14:3 in reference to forbidden animals. So several traditional sources temper the harshness of the word by citing the lack of procreative potential as the reason for the abominable nature of homosexual act. Interestingly, the medieval book Sefer HaHinok, if I'm reading that right,
Let me
uh,
see it. Uh,
yep, this word right here.
yeah, it's Sefer Ha Hin Hinuk.
Okay,
Hinuk. The I sound makes a E sound.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, it says it compares homosexual sex to marrying a barren woman. That's kind of wow. Nonetheless, the traditional Jewish position on homosexuality is still difficult for many liberal-minded Jews, and the liberal denominations have debated the extent to which gays and lesbians have been fully integrated into religious communities. So, um,
Yeah.
so So it continues on here. I found this really interesting to me personally, but it says I'll read this and then you can give your thoughts. But it says many who seek to establish full religious rights for gays and lesbians employ the research that points to the involuntary nature of homosexuality, the halak or legal terms, and then it has this word here, uh, anos. That's what it looks like. AHNOOS.
Yeah, yeah, Hanos.
Okay.
Hanos.
Refers to someone who, though commanded to do something, does not really have a choice in the matter. So in Judaism, one is only responsible for religious obligations that one can freely choose to fulfill. Thus, some Jewish authorities have argued that since homosexuality is not chosen, its expression cannot be forbidden. So, I
Listen, listen.
apparently that's a real. That's not a very good argument, apparently.
This is all silliness. This okay, so in the 1800s, Judaism had three splits.
Mm,
So
okay.
you had the beginning of Messianic Judaism in the 1800s, and then you had also the conservative and the reform. What you are mentioning right here is Reform Judaism.
Okay.
So Reform Judaism was like, hey, we're trying to be more Christian with the because back then Christian liberalism was a big thing. We're trying to be more
Yeah.
Christian
Yeah.
than anything. So abhorrent doesn't really mean abomination to God. It just means his choice was abomination. So the problem with this view is that when you're looking at Second Temple Judaism, especially in the rabbinical text, abhorrent means abhorrent. It doesn't mean uh, the person. It doesn't mean not only the act is abhorrent, but the person. So another example, right? Uh, Transsexuality.
Hmm.
The Torah is very clear. A man cannot wear a woman's garment. A woman cannot wear a man's garment.
Hmm.
But the Reformed Jewish community feel the need to say, "Oh no, they're allowed to do that," with no proof or evidence of whatsoever. They just grab little things from the Talmud and be like, "Oh, but see, he says this." Yeah, but is it binding halakha? It's not. So why are you saying this is a rabbinical mitzvah? It's not. This is all because of what I like to call the Jewish Reformation. That's literally what it is.
Yeah. No,
It's
that's
the
that's.
Jewish Reformation. That's all it is. And
But
it,
I
huh?
Uh, but I thought it was interesting to hear though, like I said, from someone who doesn't know a lot about this stuff. I thought it
Hmm.
was like the idea that like Jewish law, um there is a term in Jewish law that refers to someone who doesn't really have a choice even though they're commanded to do something. And so because homosexuality isn't a choice, then it would fall under this term in the legal in a Jewish legal section, and thus the prohibitions, the commands against it, don't necessarily apply, and thus its expression cannot be forbidden. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
So once again, one of the rules of halakha, I believe, so like when you're looking at the halakhic stuff that's being written, I believe Rashi also comments on this halakhic thing, where it's referring to a woman cannot sleep with a woman, a man cannot sleep with a man. I believe that's in the Torah.
Mm,
Um, they say that this is adherent, like in a man having sexual relations with a man.
mm.
Um, and Rashi says this is condemnable. So, like I said, in Judaism, there isn't like this absolute, like they're trying to paint here. There isn't that absolute. So one rabbi is going to say this, and another rabbi is going to say this, and then another rabbi is going to comment on this rabbi by saying this. It's really confusing. And once again, like I said, it's not binding halakha. What they just mentioned, I feel like it's a little bit disingenuous because you're trying to say that uh, it's a mitzvah to not not to follow one of the commands of Hashem because of the no choice thing. Um, that no choice thing once again isn't binding halakha nor is it Mishnah. So
Okay, so because it's not binding, it's up for debate.
it's up for debate. Like
Gotcha.
he could have no choice and he could have a choice. It just depends.
So, what would the binding Jewish law say about homosexuality? And if it does say something negative, then what does Reform Judaism do with that?
So, binding halakha wise, if and of course I don't agree with everything of the halakha because
Mm,
I'm a believer,
right.
but binding halakha wise, they would have to stone him or her.
Okay.
So, and how would I say reforms fight against that? They will try to say their typical argument when we bring up buying halakha. They're like, "Oh, that's just typical religious uh I love when they say this. This is typical religious uh problems. This is exactly why in the we got the second temple destroyed is because of this." And they get into it. They don't try to focus on the straight point of what the halakha says, buying halakha. They try to go around and do ad hominems and stuff. I've been dealing with it for years, even when
Gotcha.
I wasn't a Messianic.
Gotcha. Okay. So, uh, well, that kind of confuses me though, because no Jewish person is stoning anyone,
Yeah, exactly.
right? So, if it's binding but not followed, then how is it binding?
Okay, so like for example, and this is why I say Orthodox Judaism in its format of like punishment is because of the temple, it's completely some things are just completely eradicated. Like the idea of punishment, like what you're mentioning,
Mm,
would be like if someone's homosexual and they're in a true Orthodox setting, then they would be what's the word? Like cults do it all the time. I forgot what it's called.
um,
Um when they just cut you off.
uh, oh, shun?
Yeah, pretty much. You get shunned and you get kicked out of the shul and stuff.
Hmm. That's interesting. I mean, even I, as a Christian, would have some resistance to that because
Yeah,
you,
exactly.
what you see is Jesus inviting the sinner, not shunning the sinner, right?
Yeah, they shun a lot of people. They
Okay.
do. They do a lot. I have a friend who is an ex Hasidic Jew, and he'll teach you those things. He'll tell
Okay.
you like
So
and
they do practice a form of shunning.
yeah, a form of shunning because they know they can't stone anybody. Like that's just
Right.
murder.
So that's so that's still kind of weird to me. Like binding the halakha isn't binding
It's not binding
in its
unless it's
literal
like
form.
food, like kosher law, or like how you wear your tallit, or how you wrap tefillin. Everything else, like sacrifices and all that, it's just meaningless. No, like
That's really
besides
interesting. I mean,
besides
yeah, because they're not doing animal sacrifices either, right?
no, they're
Like, the
not.
whole Passover is done differently now, isn't it?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily? Okay.
Not necessarily like Second
But
Temple Judaism. It's so funny that you mentioned that because the sages talk about this. They talk about and these are sages before Messiah, and they
mm,
talk about how uh offerings will be done away with, but the mitzvot themselves, like you doing a Shabbat or you doing Passover, Pesach,
mhm,
they're not done away with. Like they're not
mm,
co- completely gone. Like you could still do them, just
that's
in a different way.
that's
Yeah,
really interesting. So,
I'll show you that
do
too.
you how do you well, I guess that's my question to you too then, would be because you mentioned that you're a Torah observant Messianic
Mhm,
Jew, and of
mhm.
course, an Orthodox Jew is also gonna say that they follow Torah, but that looks very differently for the both of you, I'm going to assume, right? And so, how are either one of you following the Torah when the Mosaic Law when you guys don't have the ability to? Like, obviously, neither one of you guys are stoning. Neither one of you guys have slaves, right? Um, so how does that how
Once again, that would have to be on the sages, because the sages talk about, like I said, the sages talk about how there will be a time when King Messiah comes and he will destroy that old concept and give a newer concept, which is what we see today. Like literally, like we see a whole new concept of doing Pesach, doing Shavuot, doing all this thing. Like the concept of like the remembrance of it is there, but the whole idea that I need to go and make a sacrifice isn't a thing anymore. And
Right.
the sages acknowledged that. They actually were saying, like, listen, when Messiah comes, all these sacrifices and offerings, the only thing that's going to matter is you giving thanks to God. And what's so funny is in
Mm.
Messianic Judaism, the Eucharist thing, the word Eucharist means
Means
thanks.
Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah, so it's not it's what's so interesting is the difference between a Orthodox Jew uh doing uh the feast and doing Shabbat and walking out their Yiddishkeit compared to a Messianic. It's very similar, but it's different. So, what they do in their feasts and stuff, they're waiting for their Messiah compared to I'm looking back to these feasts and saying, wow, my Messiah fulfilled all of this. And this is
Yeah.
why I'm doing it. It's because he fulfilled all of this, and this is a remembrance of him.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, like I said, I get from the new because this is a question I've always had. I get how a New Testament Christian could say, even someone that's Torah observant could say that they follow the Mosaic Law in a way, but it looks different than it would have in ancient Israel, like
Yeah, Second Temple Judaism
right?
isn't uh it's not like how it was back then. It's not. It's
Yeah.
completely different. And that's where I bring up and I would say when the sages are saying, he will give a new interpretation. There will be this new style, I would say, of mitzvot, which is going on today. Like we have this new style of doing it. Like it's no longer about sacrificing an animal to be with God. It's about purely spirit and truth.
I mean, yeah, doesn't the book of Hosea say something like that, right? Where I
Yeah.
desire, um help me out with the verse.
Yeah,
Desire,
he says I don't desire your offerings. It
right.
says in Amos too. It says your offerings I do not look at them. I'm displeased with them.
Right. I don't desire your offerings. I'm desiring your clear conscience, right? Your commitment to me, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the concept. Yeah. So, um yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess that makes sense too because Jews in exile are going to follow the Torah differently than Jews pre-exile.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I guess that actually works in favor of my argument, which is that cuz I've argued that the Mosaic law is not perfect but is also um adaptable. So like there are times like in the Mosaic like in the first 5 books itself where the covenant of Israel changes a little bit, where certain things change, but there's also the time where God says, "Hey, I don't want to give you guys a king," but Israel's like, "No, we want a king for our covenant." And then God says, "It's not going to work out, but I'll do it." And then obviously it doesn't work out, right? But this is God negotiating the covenant with his people.
Yeah.
Right? So the covenant of Israel has always seemed negotiable.
Yeah.
So I guess so I guess a a Orthodox Jew, right, and you a Christian, a Messianic Jew, would both kind of be tapping into that notion, just maybe
Yeah.
in slightly different ways.
Yeah, and slightly different. Like for example, like they have their Siddur cups on Pesach. They'll have a Siddur cup that literally says waiting for Elijah. It's the cup of Elijah. I
Mm,
don't do that because I believe Elijah came already.
w-
I
isn't
I
isn't
believe
Elijah one of the two witnesses, or am I tripping?
um
Like the in the book of Revelation, the because I know that some Christians interpreted the two witnesses as Enoch and Elijah.
Yeah, so I do see that point of view. I do see that point of view, but what I mean by, like, I believe that Elijah came already, I believed meaning, like, so, um, how do I put this? Um, so what would you say is the spirit of Elijah?
Um,
What was the spirit that was Elijah going by?
I'm actually not as sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, it talks about, there's the spirit of Elijah,
Um,
like,
oh wait, isn't you're jogging my memory a little bit? Isn't there a passage of scripture where we're told that like Jesus is came in the spirit and power of Elijah?
yeah.
Okay, so when you say Elijah has come, you're referring
I'm
to
referring to the like, the Holy Spirit that was abiding
okay,
and working in Jesus. I believe that was Elijah coming.
okay. So, but you wouldn't say that the Holy Spirit, right, is like literally Elijah,
No,
right?
no,
Obviously,
absolutely
you're saying
not.
that there's a yeah,
It's more of a metaphor, like, "Oh, this is the spirit that was dwelling in Elijah." Like,
gotcha. Okay, I see. Okay. That makes a little more sense now because yeah, if the Mosaic law is has always kind of been a negotiable thing, depending on the context, then um, you're going to get situations where the interpretation of it and the understanding of it and such is going to change, and that means the outworking of it is going to change. So he says, I know it says John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah, but where does it say that for Jesus?
so once again, like I said, um, so this is what's really interesting, right? About, and I'll send it to you later too,
Hmm.
after everything. There's a writing by a sage, and once again, all these sages are saying, "Well, who is Messiah's name?" And then one of them answers, and one of the answers was Elijah is his name.
Oh,
Um,
in the Gospels, right?
mhm.
Yeah,
Not only in the Gospels, but in rabbinical texts, it talks about Elijah is his name.
gotcha.
Like, and what it also brings up after that is the one that was the spirit that was hovering over the earth while the earth was being created was the spirit of Messiah, which is the spirit of Elijah, which is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, gotcha. So you're saying the spirit of Elijah and the spirit of the Messiah is the Holy Spirit that is dwelling in them both.
Yeah.
It's the same spirit in both
It,
people.
yeah, it's the same spirit. It's the same spirit that created everything.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's understandable. Yep. So we are hitting the 2 hour mark.
Yeah.
If you want to address some other topics, that would be totally cool. If not, then we could see if there's any questions or comments, but otherwise close out for this.
Yeah,
Stream.
yeah. I actually I that we discuss all the topics I really want to talk about. If anyone has questions,
Yep.
go ahead and ask.
Yep. Does anyone has questions? Let him know. I'll kick off kind of the first question. So why are you Torah observant? It's not for me at least. That has never been. I mean, obviously, I'm a filthy Gentile, but but but, but that's not something that's ever crossed my mind, right? Where it's like even where I even thought like even if I led a Jewish person to the Lord, that'd be a great day. But like I would never think to be like, yeah, and you should also observe Torah, right? So
Mhm.
uh and also, it didn't really help when I heard that Torah observers were like this bad heretical movement because they wanted to say that you need to follow Torah to be saved and
Yeah.
completely misunderstanding Paul, right? So kind of help me out with that. Why do you observe Torah and what would you say to other Torah observers who might be misunderstanding Paul or, you know, doing something like
Yeah,
that?
I would love to talk about that. So the reason why I'm Torah observant is because, like I said, I used to not be so hardcore about it, right? I used to not like when I first got saved, I wasn't like, "Hey, I'm Torah observant." I just said I'm a Messianic Jew. Um, the reason why I got so hardcore about it is because of that book, because of the Messianic Didache, which is right here. I
Mm.
really got into it because I realized a lot of the church were doing Jewish practices, and they didn't even realize it. Like
Yeah.
the Eucharist and the communion. That's literally every day a Jew does the Eucharist, and every day, every Shabbat I do the communion. I'm about to do the communion after this at my house. So, um, the thing is, when it comes to Torah observance, right? We have to realize something. We Our goal as Torah observant people should not be, right? It should not ever be to go back to the temple, the
Mm.
physical temple. It's Messiah. Everything is about Messiah. It's about Messiah. So to answer the question, why am I Torah observant? It's because Paul talks about this. He says, "What benefit is there to being a Jew?" It's because we have been handed down the oracles of God, the scriptures.
Mm.
Not only that, um, as believers in Messiah, we have our personal convictions. Romans 14 talks about this. He
Right.
says one considers one day all alike, while the other considers only all days, right? Well, I'm
Mm.
a person that considers one day alike. I like this one day. Well, really, they're 2 days. I like these 2 days where I get to light my Shabbat candles, I eat my challah bread, and I drink some wine in remembrance of Yeshua. And, Torah observance really convicted me is because I have this personal conviction to hold to the traditions of my fathers, my previous ancestors. I have this personal conviction, just like Paul says. Paul says in the book of Acts, he doesn't say I was or I used to. He said, I follow the law of our fathers. So,
Well,
and
does he say that when he's kind of put on trial?
yeah, he
Okay.
says that.
Yeah.
He says, "I followed the law of my fathers."
Okay.
And not only that, right? What we also have to understand too is um the early Jewish believers believed they did a form of Torah observance, just not as Second Temple. They did a form of it. And um now the reason why I would say, and I don't force this on anybody, I'm not that type of person, but I would say we like if if you're interested in Torah observance, I say try it. Listen, Torah observance brought my family together.
Mm.
My family was very divided, but once I started doing Shabbat with my family and started to do synagogue with my family got really uh started becoming together. And I've seen with other families as well. They started to become together and all those type of things. Also, um, I also would say this to the Torah observant people, right? Let's not be so legalistic to the Christians and telling Christians they don't know what Paul is saying. Instead of saying, you don't know Paul, you don't know what Paul is saying, and you're a lawless sinner. Like, let's instead show them with gentle and kindness of what we're referring to,
Mm.
what Paul is talking about, instead of saying you're condemned, right?
Right.
Instead of saying you're condemned, you don't know anything, let's show them how, just like how I show people through this book, how the early believers practiced the Torah in ways and forms. We need
Got
to do the same thing with all believers, and we need to show them like, hey, um, we need to understand Paul's letters, but at the same time, we need to be loving and kind, because regardless if you're Torah observant, regardless if you're a Christian or you're a Messianic Jew, we are one body in Messiah Yeshua. We are
Yeah.
a family.
Yeah. So
So
would you say that Torah observance is something that all Christians should be doing, or would you specifically say that this is something that Jewish Christians can engage in, but we don't necessarily need to present that or give that to Gentile Christians?
so this goes back to one of the ancient churches. Have you ever heard the ancient church of Ethiopia?
Yeah.
Do you know they're do you know they were they're Sabbatarians? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, they do Sabbath services, yeah.
Yeah, so my thing is, and I noticed this with a lot of older churches, especially in the East, they did a Sunday service and they did a Shabbat. There's times I go to church with my like I go to church with my other friends, right? And I'm just like this Jew that's wearing a kippah, and people are like, "Why is this Jew at church?" Um,
Right?
yeah, it's really funny. It's really funny. And then there's times where I'm like enjoying my Shabbat. So same thing goes today. I think the Messianic Jews should do the Shabbat with the Sunday service, and so Christians as well. I think it would be a good experience for Christians. I don't think it's like something that's like you have to do it or you're going to hell. No, I think it's something that's like experience the moment. If you like it, then you like it. If you don't, you don't. Just give it a
Okay,
try. You
okay.
know,
I
nothing
see what
condemning, nothing forceful. Just give it a try.
I see what you mean, okay, so, uh but I would assume then, though, by Torah observance, you don't just mean Sabbath, like, Seventh-day Adventists or the Ethiopian Orthodox. I
Yeah.
assume you also mean kosher laws, right? And other things.
Yeah, I mean, like, just try anything in general. Like, if and this goes back to personal conviction thing. Like, if you have a personal conviction to eat kosher, I'm totally fine with it. If you don't have a personal conviction, totally fine with it. Um, I just suggest people to try these things out and see where it brings you.
Gotcha.
Just
Okay.
give it a try.
No, that's really cool, that's really cool, and I would, I and I mean, fair enough, right? Our faith is extremely Jewish as much as we tend to forget that, right? So,
Yeah,
especially in like a more Western Christianity. So that's
yeah,
totally fair.
yep.
Yep. Um, if you guys have any questions in the chat, I would love to take those. Um, oh, I guess one other thing we can touch on before we leave that I can ask while anyone gathers questions in the comments or in the live chat. Um, so you're Trinitarian.
Mhm.
This is interesting because I find that there are a lot of Torah observers and Messianic Jews who are not Trinitarians.
Yeah, some of them are modalists.
Yeah, and I'm that's very interesting. So I don't know how far you want to get into all of this, but do you think that there's any case to be made for a Jewish Unitarian understanding of the text or something like that?
So here's the thing, right? There's a scholar, a Messianic scholar. I talk about it. Not Messianic, a Jewish Orthodox scholar, and he talks about uh I'm a Old Testament
Yeah.
Trinitarian. Yeah, I am. I'm a Trinitarian. I'm a lot like Dr. Michael Brown in that sense. I agree with church history and rabbinical history.
Mm,
Um, so there is a case for Trinitarianism. The whole idea of the Godhead is in uh Judaism. It is.
really?
It's two powers in heaven. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the two powers. But that was condemned as a heresy.
Later on. Later
Okay.
on.
Yeah.
Later on. And that's why I like Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Judaism. Do you know when Orthodox Judaism became a thing?
I don't. I
3rd
don't.
century.
Really?
That's where they came up with all their councils. And when Orthodox Judaism made their final nail was with Rambam. And the
Rambam.
yeah,
Oh,
which is
okay.
a medieval rabbi. So between the 3rd century and the
Okay.
medieval rabbi,
Got you. Got
uh,
you. Got you. Okay.
Orthodox Judaism was building up. But here's the thing, though: the two powers in heaven has always been a thing in Judaism. It's always been a thing.
Right.
It became, um, it became like a heresy around the 3rd century because they knew the Nazarenes, and they also knew the Gentile Christians would use it as an argument. So they said, "Oh, this is a heresy."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But Dr. Michael Brown points this out in his book Jews' Objections to Jesus, and Anthony Rogers has also pointed this out. But like, if you look at the not the Talmud, the Targums and Metatron, right, and Yahuel,
Yeah,
these they're not. I don't. They don't. They're not. And also like Josephus's conception of the logos, right?
yeah,
It's like they're not the same thing. Like they're not Trinitarians, but they're getting somewhere. You know what I mean? At least that's how I read it. They're definitely getting somewhere with this. And then I think that the ultimate culmination of that is like the two powers issue.
yeah.
Yeah.
If my camera goes out, it's because my phone is about to die. But
Oh, okay.
um, yeah. So, and I'll switch over to my other camera.
Okay.
Um, so the thing is, right? What we have to realize is that, how do I put this? So, there's an Orthodox scholar that says that the whole idea of a Godhead, right? The Godhead, and the
Mm-hmm.
whole idea of one of the people of the Godhead dying for all sins is a part of Judaism. And he's an Orthodox Jew. I have a book of his.
Wow. That you're gonna have to listen.
Yeah, bro,
That's
I
a
got
whole
sources, bro. You
bro.
don't
Wow.
understand.
I
I
can't
got
because
the
I can't tell
sources.
you how many Jewish people I've seen, even Torah observant, like Messianic Jews, say that they're not Trinitarians because of something like Deuteronomy 6:4, right? Or other passages
Yeah.
and other things and other traditions in Judaism. That's really interesting.
Do you still wash up the Sabbath? I don't know. Like,
I think you mean to like observe the Sabbath.
yeah, I still observe the Sabbath. I
Yeah, yeah.
still observe the Sabbath. Yeah.
We have another question here too. Do you recommend a Christian to read the Kabbalah?
No. No.
Come on, man, it's a fun read.
Like, if you want to, go ahead, but, like, someone who's a baby in faith reading the Kabbalah, I think it'll
Well,
be
that's fair. That's fair. There was a video, I forget, but the guy basically said that Jews like to complain about how much Christians have added to the Torah, but they don't even realize that that mystical or Kabbalah has added just as much, if not more, theological depth and conception and thought to the Old Testament than even Christians have. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's funny that you mention that. Uh, I think that's so funny you mention that, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the thing too, right? Because, like, obviously you can tell by what I'm wearing. I still keep, like, somewhat of an orthodox fashion because
Hmm.
I want to be a good witness to my Jewish family out there. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I'm like, what does scripture say? There's times where I'm arguing with Jews and they're like, "Oh yeah, but Rabbi so and so said this." I'm saying, "Okay, but what does the text say by itself?"
Right.
And they just love arguing the semantics. So, what I always say, right? And it's so funny cuz what I always say to these orthodox anti-missionaries is like I heard one guy say that the Mishnah and the Halakha is like putting icing on a cake. The Torah's the cake and it's the ice cream. So you're saying you're adding to the Torah? Is that what you're saying? Like, wait,
Yeah.
wait,
Y'all,
you're
you
adding
supposed to
to
add
the
we are.
you're literally adding to the Torah. You can't deny that. Um, Another thing too that I like to mention is like I always bring this up, right? The things that Dr. Michael Brown talks about, I have all his volumes on that subject.
Oh, okay, cool, cool,
That's how
cool.
I got into the apologetics with Jews, was because of Dr.
Nice.
Michael Brown's books. And the thing that I always bring up to them is there's a Zohar that talks about the virgin birth.
Mhm.
And in the Zohar, it says that the virgin will the virgin will give birth, and she will give birth to the Shekinah, and Shekinah is the glory of God. And not only
Yeah.
that she'll give birth to the glory of God, the two messiahs will be born. But yeah, so when it's saying two messiahs, it doesn't mean literal two. It means typology. So the types of messiahs will be born, which is
Oh, okay.
majesty and eternity. So the eternal king will be born.
Wow. That's a
That's what I'm saying.
Jeez,
Like,
bro. That's
that's heat
really
right
interesting.
there.
Yeah. No, yeah.
And
What
I ask Jews this, like, why does this Zohar say that? And they'll be like, well, I don't know. You're probably misinterpreting it. I'm like, no, I literally read it to you. Like,
That's wild. Okay. Okay. So if we don't have any questions
mhm,
uh then yeah, I can ask you one other thing.
yeah.
So I actually think this would really be really important then. Would you like to come back for another live stream and give a Jewish defense of Trinitarian doctrine?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, that
It's
would be
no
really fun.
problem for me.
Yeah,
Like,
we would just have what we would do then is have the live stream devoted to not to say we're ignoring the New Testament, but we're going to have the live stream devoted to the Old Testament and arguing from the Old Testament as well as Jewish sources that you can that there is a Trinitarian case that can be made here.
oh, for sure. Uh, I'll definitely do that because I have a lot of sources, bro. Like, I'm talking about I have one of the sages saying, "Oh, Messiah's name is Adonai, which means Lord." And
Right.
then we have the source of the spirit of Messiah, which is the Ruach Hakodesh, dwelling over dwelling over the earth while it's being created.
Mm,
And we also have I also have one that talks about how the Father, while Messiah is in heaven, uh, yeah, having a comeback, I like you.
yeah, he wants to
Thanks,
come
Isaiah.
back.
Um, and we also have a passage about how Abba, the Father, pretty much makes the whole world his Messiah's footstool.
Mm, got you. Okay. Yeah, no, we get I should definitely have you come back on for that. Um yeah, so that would basically be it. Just a couple of closing remarks from me. Uh, like I said, I have a bunch of stuff I'm planning. So I have some really nerdy Christian reaction videos I'm going to be planning to publish. I have a Rumble video that I'm going to be publishing, so please go follow me on Rumble. Um, just look up Rumble. It's like I said, it's an alternative to YouTube. It's free to make an account and follow me. Uh, I'm also going to be making a big video on the topic of slavery in the Old New Testament because, like I said, we really got to talk about that, as well as in Christian history and Jewish history. And I'm going to be making a video on faith. So, what is faith? Is faith belief without evidence? These sorts of things. Um, because I think that's a really interesting misunderstanding that occurs as well. So, we're gonna be making videos on all of that. TikTok content is gonna keep pumping out at least 2 videos a day, if not more. Um, yeah. So, one thing to mention, real quick that I didn't mention in the introduction. August is my 1 year anniversary. So it'll be a year since I've been making content online.
Wow.
So I'm probably gonna make it like an anniversary series, but to you and to the other members of Cross Media, I want to have a live stream party that all of that like where all of you guys are gonna be on kind of at the same time if we can get all of you on at the same time to kind of celebrate that and talk about cross media and talk about some of the things that have been really interesting to me throughout the year because a lot has happened in this year of making content online. So, um, yeah. So I would ask, would you be interested in joining that live sometime in August?
Yeah, sure. I'll do it.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Um, but yeah, so that's it for me, guys. Do you have any closing remarks? Anything you would like to say about all the things that we have talked about?
Yeah, I want to come here and say the reason why I joined Cross Media was because I don't want to be like other Torah observants, and I don't want to be like other some Messianic, some different groups of the Messianic community. I want to reach out to all believers from all backgrounds and do a complete fellowship with them and show them uh, the Jewishness of the gospel and the Jewishness of the New and Old Testament. And I really just want people to have this acknowledgement and realize, like, wow, this is the revival of the Nazarene movement in the first century. And I joined also Cross Media to fight Black Hebrew Israelites
Yeah.
uh, and Jews for Judaism, man.
I
That's
can't.
really
Bro, I'm not I listen, that's a whole nother live stream we could do, but I can't imagine how you must feel listening to some of the things the Hebrew Israelites say. Like, I
I
can't
think
even
it's funny because I'm I'm a Caribbean boy. I'm not Caucasian. So
yeah.
I feel kind of awkward when that's right.
Yeah.
You know, I feel weird when they're like, you know, one of them tried to tell me on my TikTok live the other day, like, "Hey, you're not Jewish. You're a Jew. You're from Judah." I'm just like, no, no, stop,
Uh, yeah,
please
that
stop.
would that'd be a whole nother thing though. But I honestly, Um, I w dang, I don't know. We could do like in the future, definitely do a live stream on Hebrew Israelism. But part of the issue would be that like I want to, because like I want to make sure that the community that I have online is one of like you like said, nerdy people, cool people, and Christians, right? So regardless of which side of the fence they fall on, or if they're gay or Jewish or Christian or not religious or what have you. I want them to have this space to be able to be nerdy and talk about Jesus and stuff. But like Hebrew Israelites are not going to. They're not going to respect that, especially if I bring a Jew on to refute them. Um, you know, because
They're gonna be like,
yeah, they're gonna feel some type of way.
yeah, they're gonna be really mad. Like, I'm telling you, I plan on doing a reaction video of like the whole cross media team and Sakari making like these like accusations because he made an accusation of Messianic Jews. He's like, "See, you listen to this Messianic Jew, and he believes practically what I believe, the law, and he also believes, uh, you know, all of Israel will be saved, all the Jews will be saved." And I just want to make like a reaction to that, like, "Hey, listen, bro, I'm gonna
Yeah,
at you, but you need to stop strawmanning us Messianic Jews, bro." Like,
yeah. That's wild. That's
Dr.
wild.
Michael Brown toasted that one guy, though. He just toasted him.
Oh, Gorilla Hebrew?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I saw that. That was yeah. You could feel it's like you could feel the respect, but also the disrespect radiating off of Gorilla Hebrew. Like, I don't know if that was just me or if I'm tripping, but, like,
Yeah.
I felt both. I was like, on one hand, like, he's trying to be nice, but it's like on the other, his ideology just won't let him in some instances because, like,
I like
he doesn't even believe he's talking to a real Jew, right?
yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think it's funny when he was, like, talking to Dr. Michael Brown, he said, "You believe there's no exiles, uh, you believe there's no exiles in the near future." And he's like he's like Dr. Michael Brown, he's like, "Yeah, there's no exiles in the near future because the exiles that are away will come to Jerusalem in the end of days." And he was like, "Oh, I must have misquote you then." I was like I started laughing. I was like, "That's funny."
Yeah,
Like,
that's
he
wow.
respected Dr. Michael Brown.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, definitely. Which was cool. Which it's cool. It's nice to see one of them like be human and not racist. Yeah. With all of that said, guys, thank you so much for joining me for this. This was really cool. I feel like I learned a lot. Um, at least Sakai doesn't believe they teleport the kingdom. Yeah.
Yes.
Beat me up, Scotty. Yeah. Um, but thank you guys so much for joining me for this. Like I said, I feel like I learned a lot. Like I said, I study the Old Testament quite a bit because I'm interested in the interpretation of the early chapters of Genesis. I'm interested in the topic of slavery. There's a whole issue about like God being an abusive husband in the Old Testament. That's a whole issue I'm going to get into as well eventually with like Hosea chapters 1 through 3 and Ezekiel and things like that, and the kind of imagery that is used of God there. Um, but like outside of like topical studies and reading to like typical reading, like I've read through the Torah, I've read through Proverbs and other things multiple times and whatnot, but outside of that, Judaism in and of itself as a thing is something that I'm very unfamiliar with. I only know snippets because they might have came across in my studies on Enoch or the Legends of Solomon or
Yeah.
that one weird quote that I found where Leviathan is God's pet or
That's
um,
funny. That's funny. I've heard that before.
yeah, yeah. There was one other quote I heard. There's a really cool horror movie called Jerusalem where it quotes from the Talmud in the beginning. I think it's like commenting on Jeremiah, and it says there are three gates of hell, one in the like one in the city, it's like one in the desert, one in the sea, and one in Jerusalem. And so the whole movie is based on this quote. And so in the movie, the gates of hell open up in Jerusalem, and all sorts of wild stuff happens. It's kind of a fun movie. I'm
It's
not.
so okay, it's so funny that you bring that up because
Go
I
ahead,
have
yeah.
a series, I just wanna say this on here. I
Mhm.
have a series coming up that's called Biblical Demonology and What Can Demons Do to the Saints to fight against deliverance ministry.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that. I saw you and Jude R. Young are really fighting against deliverance ministries. You guys should do response videos to Isaiah Salvador because he's a really big deliverance ministry proponent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So actually, interesting you bring that up. I can plug your stuff here real quick. If you guys have TikTok, check out. Uh, I don't want to mispronounce your name.
It's Notri Imuna.
Notsuri Imuna.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Follow. Definitely give him a follow on TikTok. You're also on YouTube, right?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube too, same thing, Notri Imuna.
Yeah. Definitely give him a follow. He makes really good content. Obviously, check your boy out too. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, be looking out for those upcoming projects. Me can we can totally schedule a live stream where we give a Jewish account of Trinitarian doctrine. So that we can definitely plan that in the future. Um, I'm not sure when my next live stream is going to be. I have some plans. I'm thinking about talking to a Christian who talks to people on Omegle about the faith. So me and him might have a conversation. The atheist that I brought on in one of my previous live streams, we might bring her on again so me and her can review a debate between an atheist and a Christian. So I got some stuff in the works, but I'm not sure
It's
when.
so funny you mentioned that. When I saw that conversation between you two, like, it seemed like 2 Christians were talking, 'cause I was like, "Wait, this is you, the atheist?" Like,
I'm honestly, I am really glad you said that, man, because I wanted to. She mentioned that she was a little nervous, right, and things like that, but excited, just a little nervous. So I wanted to make sure, because I know what it's like to be anxious. You know what I'm saying, especially with these last 3 years and stuff. So I wanted to make sure that um, my account can, like I said, be a safe account for people who are doubting their faith, for atheists and stuff to come on and have a voice, right, and have a discussion, even when we agree and disagree. But
mhm,
me and her actually did agree on a lot because I think we're similar in a few different regards. So we did find some common ground, which was really good too. And
that's good, 'cause
yeah,
she seemed like a true atheist, not anti-theist.
yes, yes, I would definitely agree with you. Yeah, she yeah, I mean, she even said in the live that she would be Christian, uh, and it's not like she wanted to leave the faith. It was just that with her understanding of faith and evidence, it seemed like the evidence got less and less and less as she studied, and then the evidence that was there was also for other religions and things like that. So she had honest reasons for saying it just doesn't seem like this is true, right? And so, um, which is good. So we could
Yeah,
definitely have those discussions. But yeah, I'm glad you said that because it shows that we did what we were supposed to do, which is have a virtuous and respectful conversation about what we agree on and what we disagree on, and we achieve that. So that tells me a lot. So
mhm.
yep. Thank you guys, like I said, so much for joining me. If you guys want more, check out the Easy Nerdy Christian YouTube channel. Check out my TikTok, and please do the same with Notsuri as well. We both have some
Yep,
good content, and I think a lot of much needed content in some areas. So check those things out. Thank you guys for showing up, and I will see you guys next time.
yep.
Thank